"You don't have to trust me," Jake muttered, squinting against the harsh glare of the twin suns. But the alien girl's wide golden eyes held something between curiosity and caution as she huddled beneath the tattered canopy of the crashed supply pod. Her teal skin shimmering faintly under the heat, the sand beneath them scorching through the thin soles of his boots. His pulse echoed in his ears as he assessed the twisted metal and scattered equipment, the remnants of a research mission gone awry. Every panel flickering with failing power, tiny sparks dancing like fireflies in the blistering air, a metallic tang and dust stinging his nose, while the temperature gauge in his suit read 107 degrees Fahrenheit and climbing, the wind whipping fine particles into a stinging haze that blurred the horizon. But he focused on her, noticing the slight tremor in her stance and the way her gloved hands clutched the edge of a fractured panel as if it were a lifeline. She tilted her head, silent, watching him with the patience of someone who had learned to measure strangers carefully. And Jake knew that hesitation could cost them both. So he knelt on the hot sand, feeling the grit cling to his palms and the pressure in his chest settle into a steady rhythm as he gently set down the small medkit from his pack, flipping it open to reveal a neatly arranged assortment of supplies, antiseptic sprays, thermal wraps, and emergency rations, each item reflecting the faint sunlight, metallic glinting and clean despite the chaos around them. He pulled a thermal blanket from the pack and held it open, careful to shield her from the sun's harsh glare, and her eyes tracked every movement, the golden irises wide and reflective as if trying to weigh the intent behind his actions. Jake spoke softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." And she blinked slowly, the translator embedded in his suit catching her faint whisper of alien words, muttered in a voice that cracked slightly from exhaustion, and it came through as, "Why? Help me?" He shrugged, adjusting the angle of the blanket so it draped over her shoulders without touching her directly, the fabric warm against the heat radiating from his palms, and said, "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I can't just leave you here." The words felt heavier than usual as the wind shifted, carrying with it a fine spray of red dust and the faint metallic scent of damaged circuits. The alien girl's gaze softened fractionally, a hesitation, and she allowed him to move closer to help untangle a twisted strap pinning her to the wreckage, the sun bouncing off her pale armor plating, scratches catching the light like tiny prisms. And for a moment the world contracted to the space between them, the roar of distant machinery, the crackle of sparking panels, the heat shimmering above the sand, all fading behind the cadence of their movements, and the quiet understanding forming between a human who had come to help and a being who had learned to survive by watching and judging. And as Jake carefully worked to free the strap, his fingers brushing briefly against hers, the air between them electric with silent agreement that action, not words, would decide the next steps. A soft groan escaped her lips as tension released, and Jake adjusted the thermal blanket to cover both of them partially as he prepared to lift her from the wreckage, feeling the unexpected weight of responsibility. The faint pulse of life under his hands a reminder of the stakes in this unforgiving landscape, his suit's sensors detecting heat signatures beyond their immediate zone, flickering faintly as he gauged the safest path back to the nearest intact shelter, the horizon rippling with mirages of distant dunes. And he whispered, more to himself than to her, "Stay close, we're getting out of this." And she nodded minutely, just enough for him to see the acknowledgement, their eyes meeting for a heartbeat that stretched with anticipation. And then he lifted her carefully into his arms, the blanket draping between them like a shield, the sand hot beneath his boots, the wind teasing the edges of the fabric as they began to move cautiously across the jagged terrain, every step measured, mindful of the unstable metal and the shifting sands, the horizon vast and unyielding, and the golden sun reflecting in her eyes hinted at the unknown journey ahead, a path that would test patience, courage, and the fragile bond forming between human and alien in this desolate world. The desert wind carried a fine layer of red dust over the rolling dunes as Jake Thompson adjusted his grip, careful not to let the alien girl slip from his arms, the thermal blanket shielding her from the relentless heat, her golden eyes tracking every flicker of movement across the horizon as he scanned for a safe path, the suit's sensors beeping softly with temperature fluctuations and structural instability warnings. each footfall a delicate negotiation with the sand and scattered metal. Debris, the sun beating down at nearly 105 degrees Fahrenheit, waves of heat rising in shimmering mirages across the landscape. Jake's breath steady despite the weight of responsibility and the intensity of the environment. He spoke in low, measured tones, explaining his plan to reach the nearby ridge where the remnants of a research station might provide shelter, the alien girl responding with a cautious nod, her voice translating to a single word of acknowledgement, a sound that carried a strange mixture of relief and wariness. Together they moved, careful and deliberate, navigating the twisted panels and fragmented instruments left from the crash, every step sending tiny sparks from damaged electronics into the hot air. Jake's fingers brushing hers as he adjusted the blanket, the contact brief but grounding, the horizon stretching vast and unyielding ahead of them. Distant rock formations rising like silent sentinels, a hint of green vegetation marking the edges of an old canyon, the wind teasing the edges of the blanket and carrying a faint metallic tang that reminded him of the dangers still unseen. He paused briefly to scan the area with the suit's sensors, detecting subtle heat signatures and shifting shadows that could indicate movement. The alien girl shifting slightly against his chest, a quiet exhalation signaling her tentative trust. He smiled faintly, feeling the weight of their shared silence, the rhythm of their breathing sinking over the next several steps, each stride calculated to maintain balance on the uneven terrain, the sand soft yet stubborn beneath the soles of his boots, the scattered panels of metal providing unstable footholds. They reached the base of a dune where a cluster of jagged rocks formed a natural barrier against the harshest wind. Jake lowered himself carefully, setting the girl down onto a more stable section of sand, while keeping the thermal blanket between them. She stretched her legs cautiously, golden eyes scanning the surroundings with a mixture of apprehension and growing curiosity, the light of the setting suns reflecting in her iridescent skin, casting subtle shades of teal and gold. Jake moved to gather some of the scattered supplies, arranging them neatly beside the makeshift camp, water rations and medical packs aligned for easy access. The alien girl watching his movements closely, learning the careful efficiency of human preparation, the wind shifting again, carrying with it a distant hum of energy from a broken instrument. They both froze momentarily, listening, before Jake whispered, "It is okay. We have a moment." And the girl exhaled slowly, a small gesture of trust forming in the brief pause. The sand cooled beneath the rocks as shadows lengthened, and for a fleeting moment, they allowed themselves to breathe together, sharing the fragile calm, aware that the next steps would demand more courage, more focus, and more understanding. The faint light glinting off the jagged metal and the alien girl's reflective eyes serving as a reminder that despite the harshness of the desert and the uncertainty ahead, they were moving forward together, each step binding them closer in silent agreement, ready to face whatever challenges the dunes held in their path. The sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows over the crimson dunes as Jake Thompson adjusted the thermal blanket around the alien girl, ensuring her shoulders were protected from the lingering heat, her eyes reflecting a mix of caution and curiosity, watching him with careful attention as he scanned the horizon for a safer route. The temperature hovering near 104 degrees Fahrenheit with the air thick and shimmering from the heat, his boots pressing into the soft sand, leaving temporary impressions that the wind would soon erase. He spoke softly, explaining the plan to reach a cluster of ancient ruins marked on his suit's digital map, a structure partially buried in sand and wind, promising shelter and relative stability. The alien girl tilted her head slightly, the translator picking up a quiet whisper that came across as "lead the way." And Jake nodded, feeling a small sense of connection in that moment of trust. He moved first, guiding her along a narrow path between jagged rocks and debris, every step carefully calculated to avoid tripping over fragments of the research equipment scattered across the dunes, sparks occasionally flickering from damaged panels, catching the sunlight and glinting briefly like fireflies. The alien girl following closely, her small hands brushing against the edge of a fractured metal plate as if confirming her footing, the wind shifting, carrying fine particles of sand into their eyes and hair. And Jake adjusted his visor, wiping the stinging grit away, feeling the weight of responsibility as every glance confirmed her reliance on his guidance. He paused briefly to hydrate, offering her a small sip from the filtered water container, her lips touching the nozzle carefully, eyes flicking up with an expression that seemed almost human in its mixture of relief and hesitation. He encouraged her with a quiet, "You are doing well," and she nodded, adjusting the blanket around herself with a careful tug, the light from the setting suns catching the iridescence of her teal skin, faint hints of gold glinting across the shoulders as they continued toward the ruins, the slope becoming steeper, rocks jutting out, uneven footing requiring more attention. Jake extended a hand to steady her on a jagged edge, her golden eyes locking onto his, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, the wind shifting again, teasing the edges of the blanket and sending small clouds of red dust swirling. He counted each step in his mind to maintain a rhythm that would allow them to reach the top safely, the faint hum of his suit's cooling system blending with the desert's ambient sounds, distant echoes of shifting sands and tiny mechanical twitches from damaged instruments adding texture to the otherwise empty horizon. The alien girl paused for a moment, brushing a hand against the blanket and exhaling softly, her trust evident in the subtle movement, and Jake allowed himself a brief smile, feeling the shared rhythm and silent coordination growing between them. The top of the ridge finally within sight, the silhouette of the ruins partially visible against the fading light, jagged walls half swallowed by centuries of sand, promising shelter from the heat and a place to stabilize and recover. He adjusted the blanket one final time, giving her a reassuring nod, and she mirrored the gesture, their steps in perfect cadence as they approached the edge, the wind catching the fabric and tossing it gently, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of the debris around them, each step echoing the growing sense of cautious camaraderie, the horizon stretching vast and unyielding, a mixture of challenge and opportunity lying ahead. And as they reached the ruins threshold, the alien girl's gaze swept over the angular shapes of ancient panels and archways, a soft murmur translating to "safe for now." And Jake nodded silently, aware that the trials were not over, but that in this brief moment, a fragile connection had been forged, a bridge between human ingenuity and alien resilience, and that every careful decision from here would continue to define the unspoken trust forming between them. The ruins welcomed them with a cool shadow that stretched across the cracked floor, Jake Thompson setting the alien girl down gently as she hesitated at the threshold, her golden eyes scanning the angular walls, remnants of old laboratories and storage units catching the fading sunlight in fractured beams, the temperature dropping noticeably to 95 degrees Fahrenheit as the wind funneled through collapsed archways, dust swirling like tiny particles of light in the shafts of remaining sunlight. Jake moved quickly to gather loose panels and create a temporary seating area, arranging supplies neatly beside the nearest wall, the medkit, filtered water, and emergency rations aligned for easy access. The alien girl sitting carefully, her hands brushing against the smooth edges of a fallen console as if feeling the weight of human ingenuity in metal and circuitry. He spoke in measured tones, explaining how they could use the ruins to stabilize and plan the next move. Her head tilted, listening, every subtle movement of her shoulders conveying cautious attentiveness, the ambient hum of residual energy from still active panels creating a faint mechanical rhythm that filled the space. Jake's breath steady as he scanned the interior for hazards, noting the cracked floors, the jagged edges of displaced metal, the occasional flicker of light from damaged equipment, and the alien girl mirrored his movements subtly, eyes tracking, learning, adapting, the small gestures of cooperation forming an unspoken bond between them. He extended a hand to help her step over a low pile of debris, her palm brushing his, a small spark of connection in the cool air. The thermal blanket draped between them like a bridge of shared warmth and trust, distant winds, carrying soft echoes of shifting sand and faint metallic tinges from the ruins' remains. He adjusted his suit's sensors, noting the subtle changes in temperature and structure, guiding her carefully to a safer spot on the fractured floor. They moved in silent coordination, the alien girl settling with a slight exhale of relief, her gaze sweeping the interior, noting the makeshift paths and safe points. Jake crouched to set up a small emergency shelter using panels and thermal blankets, the fabric stretching across uneven surfaces, creating a protective space from sun and wind. The alien girl watching every detail, the translator rendering soft murmurs of curiosity into words he could understand, questions about how humans improvise and adapt in such conditions, and he responded with clear, simple explanations, the cadence of his voice calm and deliberate, blending with the ambient sounds of the desert and the structure. They shared a quiet moment of observation, scanning the horizon through broken walls where distant dunes glimmered under the twin sun's last rays, the golden light reflecting off her skin, highlighting shades of teal and gold that shifted with every movement. The ruins. Shadows stretching longer, the temperature settling into a comfortable rhythm for the first time that day. Jake offered her a sip of water from the container, her lips touching the nozzle carefully, golden eyes flicking up with a hint of gratitude. He nodded silently, understanding that trust was forming gradually, a fragile but growing sense of partnership in a world defined by heat, dust, and uncertainty. The wind sighing through the collapsed archways carrying a mixture of fine sand and the faint tang of metal, the ambient energy of the old equipment humming faintly in the background, both of them aware of the calm before the next phase. The alien girl brushing the edge of the thermal blanket and adjusting it over her shoulders, a soft movement, almost imperceptible, and Jake watched, noting the subtle sign of comfort, the quiet acceptance of his guidance. And as the last rays of sunlight painted the interior in warm amber hues, they sat together in the ruins' cool shadow, the alien girl's gaze meeting his, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a shared understanding that for now they were safe, that in this moment, amidst debris, heat, and dust, a human and an alien were finding common ground, preparing to face the challenges that lay ahead with patience, caution, and a growing trust forged in shared hardship. The faint hum of the remaining panels in the ruins filled the cool shadow as Jake Thompson moved carefully to inspect a partially intact console, its surface layered with decades of dust and sand. The alien girl sitting nearby on a smooth slab of stone, her golden eyes tracking each movement with intense curiosity, the twin suns now low on the horizon, bathing the interior in a warm amber glow. The temperature dropping to a more comfortable 89 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air carrying a faint scent of heated metal and desert dust. Jake spoke softly, explaining the function of the panels and the basic principles of the old systems, his voice calm and deliberate, the translator picking up a quiet question from her about how humans maintain and repurpose technology. He smiled faintly, responding in measured tones, pointing to a nearby power cell and demonstrating how it could be stabilized and redirected to provide light and minor heating. She leaned forward slightly, the subtle movement of her shoulders betraying her growing interest, her fingers brushing lightly against the smooth metal as she absorbed each explanation. A quiet nod signaling comprehension. Jake adjusted a small portable sensor on his suit, noting minor fluctuations in the interior temperature and structural integrity of the ruins, planning the safest areas for them to rest and recover. He offered her a sip of water from the filtered container, and her lips met the nozzle carefully, eyes flicking up with a faint trace of gratitude. He nodded silently, acknowledging her trust, the wind shifting outside, carrying fine red sand into the broken archways, the shafts of light illuminating tiny motes that seemed to dance in the air between them. The alien girl carefully arranging some loose debris to create a more comfortable seating area, mimicking his earlier movements, the shared actions creating a rhythm of cooperation and mutual awareness. Jake observed the subtle changes in her demeanor, the way her posture relaxed slightly, shoulders no longer tense, a sign that the temporary shelter and his guidance had begun to foster a sense of security. He gestured toward the far end of the ruins, indicating a more stable section where they could set up a small area for rest. She followed his motion with an inquisitive glance, her eyes reflecting the ambient glow, the nuances of trust forming in that quiet exchange. Together they moved cautiously, lifting small pieces of metal and arranging thermal blankets to create a buffer from the uneven floor, the ambient hum of remaining equipment providing a soft, mechanical heartbeat to the space. The alien girl occasionally brushing the blanket edges with her fingertips, a subtle acknowledgement of the protection it offered. Jake adjusted it gently, ensuring it covered both her and part of the floor to provide insulation from lingering heat radiating from the sand beneath. The horizon beyond the broken walls reflecting deep oranges and fading golds, casting long shadows across the interior. The moment stretching with a calm anticipation, a fragile sense of partnership forming between human and alien, a shared understanding of patience, caution, and careful adaptation. Jake finally settled beside her, the thermal blanket draped loosely, his gaze sweeping the ruins for any additional hazards, noting unstable debris and sharp edges, her eyes following each movement. Silent questions translating through the device as curiosity and cautious trust. They shared a quiet moment, breathing in the calm air of the ruins, the distant desert wind carrying with it both the faint metallic tang of old circuits and the scent of cooling sand. And in this stillness, they recognized the subtle but powerful rhythm of cooperation that had begun to take shape, a bond forged not in words but in careful observation, mutual respect, and the tentative beginnings of understanding, the shadows stretching longer, signaling the approach of night and the continuation of their journey together. The first stars began to appear in the dusky sky above the desert as Jake Thompson carefully adjusted the thermal blanket around the alien girl, her golden eyes following every movement, reflecting the soft light of the settling suns, the temperature dropping to a comfortable 87 degrees Fahrenheit, the wind carrying faint traces of desert dust and the metallic tang from the fractured panels scattered throughout the ruins. Jake crouched to inspect a partially intact console, his hands brushing the cool metal while the alien girl observed silently, curiosity evident in the tilt of her head and the slight narrowing of her eyes, the translator capturing her soft question about how the equipment had survived so long, and he responded patiently, explaining the durability of the alloys and the redundancy built into the systems, her expression shifting subtly. A hint of admiration mingled with cautious trust. Jake then moved to create a small area for rest, arranging the thermal blankets over stable sections of the floor, the alien girl mimicking his careful placement of a few panels to create a smooth surface, her fingers brushing lightly against his as they worked in quiet coordination, the ambient hum of remaining powered panels filling the space with a gentle, mechanical rhythm. Outside the broken archways, the desert wind whispered across the dunes, carrying the soft, distant sounds of shifting sands. Jake offered her a sip of filtered water from the small container, her lips meeting it carefully, golden eyes lifting briefly to meet his in silent acknowledgement. He nodded slightly, feeling the weight of their shared understanding. Together, they moved slowly through the ruins, stepping carefully over uneven floors, the alien girl leaning on the temporary supports he had arranged, her movements tentative but increasingly confident, the shadows stretching longer as the night approached, the dual moons beginning to rise, casting pale silver light across the interior, the alien girl exhaling softly, a faint sense of relief in the movement of her shoulders, and Jake allowed himself a small smile, feeling the growing trust, the rhythm of their steps and breaths sinking. Naturally, each paused to adjust a blanket or rearrange a piece of debris, reinforcing the silent cooperation between them. He set up a makeshift observation point near a partially intact wall, the metal and stone providing a stable vantage over the surrounding dunes, the alien girl following, sitting beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon as he explained quietly how to detect shifts in the wind and subtle changes in temperature that might indicate sand movement or structural instability. She nodded carefully, absorbing each detail, the twin moons casting shifting shadows that highlighted the contours of the debris and the curves of the temporary shelter. Jake extended a hand to help her steady herself as she leaned slightly forward to examine a far wall, their palms touching briefly, a small spark of connection in the cool night air, the ambient sounds of the desert mingling with the soft hum of the remaining electronics, creating a rhythm of calm observation and careful awareness. He gestured to a patch of floor protected from wind drafts and scattered debris, suggesting it as a place to rest for a short while. She nodded, adjusting the blanket over her shoulders, and they settled. into the shaded corner, side by side, the alien girl's gaze shifting between him and the horizon beyond the ruins. An unspoken understanding forming that they would face the challenges of the desert and the uncertainties of the journey together, the soft rustle of the thermal blanket and the faint mechanical hum providing a sense of continuity and security. The night settling around them with the distant glimmer of stars reflecting in her golden eyes, and in the quiet, Jake felt the fragile but growing bond of trust, patience, and mutual respect, a foundation that would guide the next steps of their cautious journey through the alien landscape. The twin moons cast silver streaks across the cracked walls of the ruins as Jake Thompson guided the alien girl through a narrow corridor formed by collapsed panels and stone, her golden eyes scanning every surface with quiet intensity. The temperature steady at 86 degrees Fahrenheit, a slight breeze drifting through openings in the structure. Carrying the faint scent of heated metal and distant sand, Jake spoke in calm, measured tones, explaining how to navigate the uneven surfaces safely, pointing out potential weak spots in the flooring and highlighting stable areas for resting or observing the exterior. She listened intently, nodding subtly as she absorbed each instruction, her movements becoming more confident as she mirrored his careful steps, the translator picking up soft murmurs of curiosity that he answered patiently, noting her growing attentiveness. The ambient hum of the remaining powered panels adding a soft mechanical rhythm to the quiet of the night. Jake paused briefly, adjusting a small sensor on his suit to detect any temperature or structural changes, and the alien girl followed his gaze, learning to anticipate shifts in sand and wind, the glow of the twin moons reflecting off her iridescent skin, highlighting hints of teal and gold that shifted as she moved. He reached a small pile of debris and began arranging thermal blankets and panels to create a more comfortable pathway. She assisted with careful hands, the subtle contact of their fingers reinforcing an unspoken rhythm of cooperation and mutual trust. Outside the ruins, the desert night was calm, the wind whispering softly across dunes that stretched beyond the horizon, distant shadows shifting under the moonlight. Inside the ruins, Jake demonstrated how to stabilize a partially intact console, showing her the proper alignment of loose panels and the correct handling of fragile components. She watched attentively, occasionally mimicking the movements. Her posture relaxed slightly as the confidence grew, the faint hum of active circuits and cooling fans blending with the desert sounds, creating a sense of steady rhythm and focus. He offered her a small sip from the filtered water container, and her lips met it carefully, golden eyes lifting in silent acknowledgement. He nodded subtly, feeling the developing trust and partnership. Together they moved further into the ruins, navigating a short flight of uneven steps and crossing a partially collapsed floor section, each motion deliberate and synchronized. The shadows stretching longer as the moons climbed higher, casting patterns across the debris and illuminating hidden edges of the panels. The alien girl occasionally brushing the blanket over her shoulders, a small gesture of comfort and security. Jake adjusted it gently, maintaining their shared space and warmth, the air carrying a faint metallic tang from the scattered equipment. And as they reached a more stable section of the ruins, he guided her to sit on a broad stone slab, arranging thermal blankets beneath for comfort. They both took a moment to observe the surrounding structure, the faint glimmers of residual energy from old panels casting soft light over walls and floor, creating a mosaic of shadows and highlights. The alien girl's gaze sweeping over the details, absorbing the environment and Jake's careful guidance. The quiet of the night punctuated only by distant whispers of wind and subtle creaks of shifting debris. In this shared stillness, a delicate sense of trust and coordination had solidified, an unspoken understanding that in this unpredictable desert landscape, they would face the next challenges together, moving with patience, awareness, and a growing bond forged from careful observation and mutual reliance. The soft hum of equipment and gentle swish of wind carrying the rhythm of their quiet companionship into the depths of the ruins as they prepared for the next stage of their journey. The pale light of the twin moons spilled into the ruins, casting silver highlights across fractured panels and stone surfaces. Jake Thompson moving carefully along the uneven floor, adjusting the thermal blanket draped over the alien girl as she followed him closely, her golden eyes wide with cautious curiosity. The air cool at 85 degrees Fahrenheit, carrying a faint metallic tang from the old equipment and the dry scent of desert dust drifting through openings in the walls. He spoke softly, explaining the layout of the ruins and pointing out areas of stability versus spots that might give way under weight. She listened intently, nodding occasionally, her hands brushing against the edges of a smooth panel as she absorbed each instruction, the translator conveying her quiet inquiries about the structures and his explanations back into understandable phrases. He demonstrated how to step lightly across uneven surfaces, using small handholds and careful balance, her posture adjusting with each movement, gaining confidence in the rhythm of navigation. Jake paused near a partially intact console to check sensors, noting temperature shifts, subtle changes in structural integrity, and the wind patterns through the openings, while the alien girl crouched beside him, her head tilted as she observed the readings. Absorbing his methodical approach, he offered her a sip of filtered water, her lips meeting the nozzle with care, eyes meeting his briefly in a moment of silent acknowledgement, the sound of the wind outside brushing against broken archways and scattered debris forming a steady, calming rhythm. Jake guided her to a higher vantage point within the ruins where the floor was more stable, the pale light reflecting across her iridescent teal skin, hints of gold shifting with movement, and together they observed the desert landscape, noting distant dunes and formations. The faint glimmer of residual energy from old panels providing a soft glow against the silvered shadows. They worked in quiet coordination, arranging thermal blankets and fragments of panels to create a path across a short, uneven section of the floor, fingers brushing briefly in subtle acknowledgement of cooperation, the alien girl adjusting the blanket to cover her shoulders while mimicking his careful placements. The ambient hum of the remaining active circuits blending with the distant whisper of wind to create a rhythmic, steady background. Jake spoke in measured tones about planning the next steps, the alien girl nodding, absorbing the logic and intention in his words, the soft movement of her shoulders and the focus in her eyes reflecting her growing trust. Together they moved slowly to inspect a narrow passage partially blocked by debris. He guided her gently, showing how to use handholds and maintain balance, her golden eyes fixed on him, following each step, a shared rhythm forming in the quiet night, the shadows lengthening across the floor and walls, reflecting faint glimmers of the twin moons, the desert beyond the ruins calm and expansive, the sound of distant shifting sands faint against the metallic hum and their measured breathing. Jake paused to adjust a loose panel, ensuring it would not shift under weight, and she observed carefully, following the gesture and adjusting another piece slightly, the silent cooperation reinforcing their tentative bond. They finally reached a small, relatively stable alcove with smooth flooring, Jake gesturing for her to settle while he arranged a few more thermal blankets to provide padding and insulation, her gaze sweeping the area, the translator capturing soft expressions of curiosity and tentative approval. He smiled slightly, acknowledging the shared understanding, the faint wind carrying dust through cracks in the walls, mixing with the subtle scent of metal and heat, the moons climbing higher and casting elongated shadows, and in the quiet glow, both of them paused. The alien girl leaning slightly against the blankets, the silent rhythm of mutual trust and careful coordination settling over them, a fragile but growing sense of companionship, awareness, and preparation forming. As they observed the ruins and the desert beyond, readying themselves for the next phase of the journey across the alien landscape. The horizon outside the ruins glimmered with the first hint of pre-dawn light. Jake Thompson adjusting the thermal blanket around the alien girl as she cautiously stood on the smooth stone floor, her golden eyes reflecting the dim silver of the twin moons fading into pale morning. The temperature holding steady at 84 degrees Fahrenheit, the faint wind carrying the scent of heated metal and dry sand through the fractured archways. He spoke softly, explaining the plan to navigate through the outer sections of the ruins toward a safer, more sheltered area where the sun would be less intense. She tilted her head attentively, absorbing each detail as they moved together, feet careful on uneven surfaces, hands occasionally brushing the edges of displaced panels, creating a rhythm of silent coordination. Jake paused briefly to inspect a partially intact console, fingers tracing lines of worn metal and circuits, showing her how to identify stable areas versus spots that might shift. Underweight, her gaze following closely, mimicking his movements, golden eyes reflecting a mixture of focus and quiet trust. He adjusted a small sensor on his suit to monitor structural integrity and temperature changes, the readings displaying subtle variations across the ruins. While the alien girl crouched to observe, the translator capturing her quiet murmurings about human methods and the logic of stability. He nodded, explaining each concept patiently, the faint hum of remaining powered panels providing a gentle background rhythm. Together they moved to a low passageway, clearing small debris and arranging thermal blankets for stability, their hands brushing briefly in coordinated motions, a small gesture reinforcing trust. Outside, distant dunes shimmered in early morning light, their peaks casting long shadows, the air crisp and carrying soft whispers of shifting sand. Jake guided her carefully through a narrow corridor of fallen metal, showing how to step lightly and maintain balance, her posture becoming more assured with each careful step. The interplay of moonlight fading and sunlight growing, creating a dynamic pattern of shadows and highlights across the walls and floor. The alien girl leaning slightly to inspect a particularly smooth surface, her hands following Jake's guidance. A subtle sign of increasing confidence, he offered her a sip of filtered water, and her lips met it carefully, eyes lifting briefly to meet his in quiet acknowledgement. He nodded with faint satisfaction. Together they reached a small alcove with stable footing, Jake arranging thermal blankets and debris to form a comfortable resting area, while she observed and assisted, her movements careful and deliberate, mirroring his approach, the ambient hum of remaining circuits blending with the soft wind outside, forming a rhythm of steady calm. He spoke about planning the next steps in quiet tones. She nodded attentively, absorbing the information. The faint creak of shifting panels and distant sand movements providing subtle markers in the stillness. They paused together, scanning the horizon beyond the ruins where dunes and distant rocks stretched endlessly, a shared understanding forming in their synchronized breathing and movements. The alien girl brushing the thermal blanket over her shoulders, a subtle gesture of comfort and trust. Jake adjusted it gently, the weight of silent cooperation evident between them, the soft light highlighting the contours of the ruins and their forms. In the quiet moment, the bond of mutual awareness, patience, and careful observation had solidified, creating a foundation for the challenges yet to come in the harsh desert environment. The twin moon's faint glow lingering as the morning light grew, reflecting in her eyes, a shared rhythm of anticipation and preparedness holding them steady for the next stage of their cautious journey across the alien landscape. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the desert horizon, illuminating the jagged dunes beyond the ruins. Jake Thompson carefully led the alien girl through a narrow passageway, her golden eyes following each step, reflecting both caution and growing trust, the temperature steady at 83 degrees Fahrenheit, the air carrying a faint metallic tang from the scattered panels and the dry scent of desert dust drifting through cracks in the stone walls. He spoke softly, explaining how to gauge the stability of the uneven flooring and pointing out the safest points to place her feet. She nodded attentively, mimicking his careful movements, her hands brushing lightly against the edges of panels and debris as she adjusted her balance. The translator catching her quiet inquiries about his methods and intentions, and he responded patiently, demonstrating the proper way to step lightly and use the surroundings for support, the faint hum of remaining powered circuits providing a subtle rhythm to their cautious progress. Jake paused briefly to adjust a sensor on his suit, detecting minor shifts in temperature and structure, while the alien girl crouched beside him, observing each detail, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concentration. The soft wind brushing through the ruins carrying fine grains of sand, and the faint warmth of the sun beginning to rise. He offered her a small sip of filtered water, and her lips met it carefully, eyes lifting to meet his in quiet acknowledgement. He nodded subtly, feeling the bond of trust strengthen. Together they navigated a short flight of uneven steps, the alien girl following closely, her movements more confident with each careful stride. The interplay of early sunlight and shadow creating dynamic patterns across the walls and floor, highlighting edges and surfaces. Jake demonstrated how to brace lightly against walls and panels to maintain balance. She copied the motions, her hands following his guidance. The gentle rhythm of their synchronized movements building a quiet sense of cooperation. Outside, distant dunes glimmered in the soft morning light, the desert calm and expansive, the hum of the remaining electronics mixing with the whisper of wind to create a steady, reassuring background. They reached a small alcove where the floor was relatively stable. Jake arranged thermal blankets and scattered panels to provide a secure resting spot, the alien girl assisting with careful placement, each motion deliberate, mirroring his approach, the subtle contact reinforcing their silent partnership, the soft rustle of blankets and distant sighs of wind punctuating the calm. Jake spoke quietly about the next leg of their journey, pointing out potential routes and hazards beyond the ruins. She nodded, listening intently, golden eyes shifting between him and the distant horizon, the shadows lengthening and fading with the rising sun, the pale light highlighting the contours of the panels and walls, the alien girl brushing the blanket over her shoulders, a sign of cautious comfort. Jake adjusted it gently, maintaining the shared warmth and protection, their synchronized breathing and movements reflecting a growing sense of understanding, observation, and mutual reliance. The quiet of the ruins filled with the rhythm of careful steps, the faint glow of residual energy from old circuits casting soft illumination over walls and debris. And in this serene but alert moment, they recognized the fragile trust and partnership that had formed, a foundation for navigating the desert terrain ahead and facing the challenges that the early morning light would soon reveal, both aware that the next decisions and movements would require patience, awareness, and continued cooperation as they prepared to move forward together. The early morning light intensified across the desert, casting long golden streaks over the dunes as Jake Thompson led the alien girl carefully through a narrow corridor of the ruins, her golden eyes reflecting both vigilance and growing trust. The temperature steady at 83 degrees Fahrenheit, and a faint breeze carried the scent of warm metal and dry sand through cracks in the stone walls. Jake crouched to adjust a loose panel, demonstrating the proper technique to reinforce it for safe passage. She watched intently, her hands hovering close to mimic his movements, the translator catching her whispered questions about structural stability and human improvisation. And Jake responded in calm, deliberate tones, explaining the principles of balance and support, the soft hum of residual circuits providing a gentle rhythm to their cautious actions. They moved forward carefully, navigating uneven floors and scattered debris, the alien girl stepping lightly after his guidance, her posture more assured with each stride, the sunlight filtering through collapsed archways illuminating faint glimmers across her iridescent teal skin, hints of gold shifting as she moved. Jake paused near a low arch, surveying the horizon beyond the ruins, distant dunes stretching endlessly, the desert calm, yet full of subtle motion. The alien girl crouched beside him, leaning slightly to examine a patch of floor he indicated as stable, her golden eyes following every movement, nodding as she absorbed his instructions, the rhythm of their synchronized steps creating a quiet sense of cooperation and trust. Jake extended a hand to help her over a small gap, their fingers brushing briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared purpose. Outside, the desert wind whispered across the dunes, carrying faint grains of sand through openings, mixing with the metallic tang from the scattered equipment inside the ruins. The soft rustle of thermal blankets and subtle creaks of shifting panels provided a gentle, familiar cadence. Jake spoke quietly about planning the next leg of the journey, highlighting safer paths and potential resting points. The alien girl listening intently, golden eyes flicking between him and the distant horizon, absorbing each detail, the ambient hum of remaining powered circuits blending seamlessly with the soft wind, creating a steady, reassuring backdrop. They reached a slightly elevated section of floor that offered a more secure vantage point, Jake arranging thermal blankets and debris to stabilize a temporary rest area, the alien girl assisting, her movements careful, mirroring his attention to detail. the gentle contact reinforcing the silent rhythm of cooperation, the shadows stretching and shifting as the sun climbed higher, the early light painting the ruins in warm gold and soft silver. Jake gesturing to the horizon, explaining how to anticipate subtle changes in terrain and wind to maintain balance. She nodded, absorbing the knowledge and mirroring his focus in each motion, the soft swish of blankets and faint hum of electronics underscoring the calm but alert atmosphere. Together they paused to observe the surrounding dunes, the ruins casting long shadows across the sand, a shared understanding settling between them. The alien girl brushing the thermal blanket over her shoulders, a small gesture of comfort, and Jake adjusting it gently, their eyes meeting briefly, the quiet trust and growing bond evident in the stillness, the desert beyond calm and expansive, the warm light glinting off scattered panels and her shifting iridescent skin, every detail reinforcing the fragile but steadily strengthening partnership, the rhythm of synchronized breathing and careful steps preparing them for the next challenge in the desert landscape, each aware of the reliance and mutual support that had developed in the quiet hours of careful movement and shared observation, the twin moons fading and morning sunlight taking precedence, a serene yet alert moment marking the continued journey through the alien terrain together. The rising sun poured golden light through the fractured walls of the ruins, highlighting the scattered panels and jagged stone. Jake Thompson carefully guiding the alien girl across a partially collapsed floor, her golden eyes wide with cautious focus as she followed his measured steps, the temperature hovering at 82 degrees Fahrenheit, the desert air carrying a soft metallic tang and the scent of warmed sand. He spoke softly, explaining how to use stable surfaces and handholds to navigate safely. She mirrored his movements, brushing lightly against the edges of debris as she adjusted her balance, the translator capturing her quiet questions and conveying them into understandable words. Jake responded with calm, deliberate instructions, demonstrating each careful movement, the ambient hum of remaining circuits blending with the soft whisper of the wind outside, forming a rhythm that guided their progress. Together they moved through a narrow corridor where shadows stretched across broken panels, the alien girl stepping lightly after his guidance, her posture increasingly confident, hints of iridescent teal and gold shifting across her skin in the morning light. Jake paused near a stable console, adjusting a loose panel and explaining how to reinforce it for safe use. She crouched beside him, observing each detail, her eyes tracking his hands and following his instructions, the subtle gestures reinforcing trust and coordination. Outside, distant dunes shimmered under the full morning sun, the desert calm yet dynamic, the wind carrying faint grains of sand through openings in the ruins. Jake guided her carefully across a short flight of uneven steps, demonstrating how to maintain balance and distribute weight. She mirrored his careful movements, hands lightly brushing the smooth surfaces for guidance, the quiet hum of residual energy from old circuits adding a gentle background rhythm. He offered her a small sip of filtered water, her lips meeting it with care, eyes lifting briefly to meet his in silent acknowledgement. He nodded, feeling the bond of trust strengthening. Together they reached a higher section of floor that provided a secure vantage point, Jake arranging thermal blankets and panels to stabilize the area, the alien girl assisting, mirroring his attention to detail, the soft contact reinforcing their silent rhythm, the sunlight streaming through gaps casting dynamic patterns across the walls and floors, highlighting edges and contours. Jake gestured toward the horizon, explaining how to anticipate changes in terrain and wind to maintain balance while moving forward. She nodded attentively, absorbing the instructions and following his gaze toward the distant dunes, their synchronized breathing and cautious steps forming a steady rhythm, the shadows lengthening and shifting with the sun, the ambient hum of circuits and soft rustle of blankets creating a steady background. Jake and the alien girl paused for a moment in the calm alcove, scanning the ruins and the expansive desert beyond, the soft breeze brushing against the thermal blankets and their skin, a subtle sign of comfort and reassurance. The alien girl brushing the blanket over her shoulders, and Jake adjusting it gently, reinforcing their shared protection and warmth. The twin moons now fully faded, the morning sunlight casting long golden shadows. And in this quiet, focused moment, a fragile but steadily strengthening bond of trust, coordination, and mutual awareness settled between them, preparing both human and alien for the next stage of their cautious journey across the unforgiving landscape of the desert and the ancient, crumbling ruins, each step forward guided by patience, observation, and the unspoken understanding of reliance on one another. The morning sun now fully illuminated the desert beyond the ruins, casting sharp golden light across the jagged edges of the collapsed panels and the smooth stone floors. Jake Thompson led the alien girl toward a wider corridor, her golden eyes scanning every detail of the environment with a mixture of alertness and growing confidence. The temperature holding steady at 83 degrees Fahrenheit. A gentle breeze carrying the faint scent of heated metal and dry sand through the fractured walls. He spoke calmly, explaining how to maintain balance while navigating uneven surfaces, demonstrating with precise, measured steps. She mirrored his movements carefully, her hands occasionally brushing against the edges of panels for support, the translator capturing her soft inquiries about the stability of the ruins and her subtle questions about human improvisation, and he responded in clear, patient tones, showing her how to assess surfaces and plan each step, the ambient hum of residual circuits blending with the whisper of wind to create a rhythmic, reassuring backdrop. Together they moved across a series of low arches and scattered debris, each step deliberate and synchronized, shadows stretching across the floor and walls with the shifting light. Jake paused briefly to adjust a small sensor on his suit, detecting minor structural shifts and temperature variations, while the alien girl crouched beside him, observing carefully the faint glimmer of residual energy, reflecting off her iridescent teal skin with hints of gold that shimmered as she adjusted her position. He offered her a sip of filtered water, and her lips met it carefully, eyes lifting to meet his in quiet acknowledgement. He nodded slightly, feeling the trust between them solidifying. They reached a small alcove with a stable floor where Jake arranged thermal blankets and panels to create a comfortable resting area. She assisted with meticulous care, mimicking his movements, their hands brushing briefly, reinforcing the unspoken rhythm of cooperation and understanding. The rising sun casting warm, elongated shadows across the ruins, the twin moons now completely faded, the ambient hum and gentle wind carrying a steady rhythm through the space. Jake guided her to a vantage point where the distant dunes could be observed, pointing out subtle shifts in terrain, areas of loose sand, and potential shelter points. She nodded attentively, absorbing each observation and instruction, golden eyes following his gestures, the quiet coordination between them reflecting mutual awareness and reliance, the soft rustle of blankets and distant sounds of wind punctuating the calm. They paused together, side by side, the alien girl adjusting the thermal blanket over her shoulders, a subtle gesture of comfort, Jake adjusting it gently too. Reinforce shared warmth and protection, the sun casting a soft glow that highlighted the contours of the ruins and their forms, their synchronized breathing and careful movements solidifying a delicate bond of trust, observation, and preparation, the distant desert horizon stretching endlessly, calm yet full of subtle challenges, every detail reinforcing their mutual reliance, patience, and careful planning. And in this serene, focused moment, human and alien shared an unspoken understanding that the foundation of trust and coordination they had built would guide them through the next stages of the journey across the unforgiving landscape, each aware of the importance of patience, attention, and mutual support, their steps now part of a shared rhythm, ready to face the uncertainties of the desert together, the ruins providing shelter, insight, and a quiet space to solidify the bond that had grown from cautious steps, observation, and the steady cadence of silent cooperation, the morning light reflecting off panels and her shifting iridescent skin, marking the culmination of the cautious yet profound journey of mutual understanding, preparation, and shared resilience across the alien terrain.